being with y'all. So I was actually scheduled to speak at Tuskegee University tomorrow, but they moved it out to next month. So it's going to be, I think, March 19th or something. The dean has a symposium on ethics in engineering that he does every year for a lot of the seniors. And so I'm going to come down and speak on that. And at that time, I'm planning to spend 2 or 3 days down here, come out and see if y'all are actually going to school on campus and things like that. I got my doubts about some of y'all, but I may need to go over and get my teeth checked over at Marquia's place too. See if she's doing a good job. But I look forward to that. And yeah, I'm speaking at Tuskegee on that Monday afternoon. I think it's a 5 o'clock class. But I want to set up some stuff speaking at Auburn University. Get my friend Jeffrey. We gave up one of the best we have, sent Jeffrey down here. I hope y'all appreciate. That's a sacrifice on our part. Let that guy be here. And on the other hand, I don't know of anywhere that Jeffrey can learn more than being in this church. This is such an amazing group. I love being with you guys. I love people to be with you. Friday night, I'm 73 years old now. My wife's 73, and she's always had less energy than me. And we've gotten to the point, especially the pandemic came along, and then just our age, we don't do much in the evenings. Some of the college kids say, hey, could I take you guys out to dinner? I want to spend time with your wife. They always want to spend time with her, not me. But they don't get to see her much. So I tell them, we don't do nights. If you want to go somewhere at maybe 5 o'clock, we'll go. But it's difficult on my wife to be out at night. That's okay. I go out one night a week, go Tuesday Night Live at campus, and I spend the whole evening with these guys. Other than that, I tell them I don't show up much at night. That's more than I need to do. And my first priority is always taking care of my wife. The Bible teaches me that. So as all you guys have wives, I want y'all to be sure to take care of that. And wives, take care of your husbands in the same way. Be sure you do those things. But Friday, I've been getting with students. I always tell them, and I tell you guys, if I don't spend a little bit of time with you, say 30 minutes, I can't even remember your names. There's too many of you. I work with students all over the world, and I'm getting with a lot of them every week. Just the number that we have there at North River is challenging. So I try to make a little time, sit on campus with somebody, get to know them. So I've been doing that some, and particularly these two students I met at Georgia Tech, they're sisters, and their mom and dad are from Korea originally. So these beautiful Asian girls. They're probably a couple of years apart, and I got with them, get to know them. I drove down to Georgia Tech 3 times that week. And I don't know why, but students always want to meet at their convenience. So like 3 or 4 in the afternoon. I don't know if you tried driving out of Atlanta at 3 or 4 in the afternoon or 5 in the afternoon. Get back up to Marietta. It ain't easy. It's like a parking lot on 75. So I did that 3 times in 1 week. So I got with Angela and Sarah, the 2 sisters. While I'm getting with them, this other girl came over, and I knew I was supposed to know her, but I couldn't remember her name. She just dropped over, sitting outside there. And so I said, hey, can I get your number? And that way I got her name so I could act like I knew what her name was. I'm smart, I got it going on. And so I set up with Leah to get together on Friday. And then I got with this girl, Maya, on Thursday. So it's just boom, 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 all afternoons. And usually I like to take a nap about 3 in the afternoon, so that getting together at Georgia Tech at 3 is not my best time. But anyway, Sarah and Angela both, they're very bright kids. They wouldn't be at Georgia Tech, When I walk on campus at Georgia Tech, the low IQ alarm goes off. So I couldn't get in there if my life depended on it. But Angela and Sarah's talking to me, and these brilliant young women, and we're getting to know each other. And I asked them to tell me something about themselves. And both of them said, we tend to be introverted. We're not extroverted. We're not these bubbly people who are always outgoing. They're really interested in the Bible. And so I said, well, my wife is very introverted, but she's just the most amazing person I've ever known. So since that time, they wanted to meet Gail. And so they come to church, and the first Sunday they asked me, is Gail here? And she was out sick that week. Well, the next Sunday, they got to me a little late. She'd already left, because introverts don't hang around for 2 hours talking like some of us do. So Friday night, last week's Valentine's, and I took Gail out to dinner, and over romantic dinner, I said, "Hey, something going on Friday night. They're having a dating devotional about dating at campus." And I said, "Would you go with me to that? I know it's late, starts like 7:30. You'll be tired. But would you go with that with me? Because all these students want to meet you. We're going to have a panel. They can see you and they can even ask you questions." And she said, "I don't like answering questions. I don't like being in the public spotlight." I said, "Probably when you get a panel like that, all these people on the panel, they know a lot and they like to tell you all the stuff they know. So they want to answer every question. So you don't have to worry about answering questions." I'm sorry to all you other people I'm talking about here. But I said, "You don't have to worry about answering the question. They'll do that. The only question you'll probably get is some wisecrack in the audience will say, 'How have you put up with Jack this long?'" And that's a pretty easy question. But so Gail went with me, got to spend time with those kids, and they just love talking to her. Yeah, it's seriously that whenever people usually meet me first because I'm more outgoing. When they meet Gail, it's like I don't even exist. They just walk past me and go straight to her. I don't blame them. She's so wise. I met her here at Auburn University. Uh, and just a little hint for you people, I shared at the dating devotional. They're telling stories about how they were so spiritual when they built their dating relationships and all these things. And I said, well, when I was in college, I was a total loser. I skipped class all the time. When I first came to Auburn, I was a junior and I'm failing my courses. And I asked this girl, Gail, on a date or two, and she went out with me. Then she found out that I was skipping classes and she just started avoiding me. She worked over here at the library at Ralph Brown Drawn Library. She would hide behind the card catalogs when I came in just to avoid talking to me. She didn't want nothing to do with me. I was such a slacker, and she was really a goody two shoes. She didn't miss no classes. She made really good grades. She was salutatorian in her high school, just all this good stuff. But I took the hint. I just left her alone. But we got to know each other by being involved in things at church together. And I made it back the second semester and straightened up some. But over the course of that time, she got to know me. And she said, after a few months, I think it was in April of that year, she told me one night we were out walking somewhere together. She said, I really like you. I don't know if you feel the same way. And I'd only had 3 dates in my life. I didn't know anything about this stuff. Never had a girlfriend. So I said, I don't know if I like you enough to marry you. And I'm sure she's looking like, what kind of idiot are you? But the thing I meant is, I used to get so nervous on dates, I'd get headaches. So the only reason I would go on a date is to find somebody to marry. So I wanted to get married, but I didn't explain that to her. But she went home and cried because I said that. And then a week later, though, I asked her to go steady. And then 3 weeks later, I bought a ring and proposed to her. And so we've been married 51 years now, long time. But because we really built it on God. But I told students, if you feel like you're a total loser like I was, I had no sense of fashion. I had no sense of style. Whenever I got a haircut, I'd get my hair cut down to buzz cut, save money. This back when you're supposed to have long hair, guys. I didn't do that. And I didn't, man, my clothes just awful. But the reason she liked me, and she's told me later, is because you were kind to everybody. That's the thing that she noticed. So, guys, it isn't that you got the really fancy car, that you're a great athlete, all these other things. Some of the girls notice that, but that shouldn't be the most important thing, and vice versa for when you notice the girls. That's free advice on things. I tell you that, mention that I wanted to especially talk this morning about some scriptures about forgiveness, because in marriage and in any relationship, you have to learn how to be forgiving with one another. So look over in Matthew chapter 6. Jesus sets the tone for us. Verses 14 and 15. Somebody want to read that out loud for us?
We're going to do it.
Do it. 14 and 15, chapter 6. Matthew. Okay, Carrie's got it over here. He's going to read it for you.
Okay. For if you forgive other people when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their sin, your Father will not forgive yours.
Okay. Somebody else look over in Luke chapter 11. Jesus, there was a time there when the disciples came up to Jesus and said, Lord, would you teach us to pray like John taught his disciples to pray? And most of us probably grew up down south. South tends to be a religious place. We just sort of assume we're supposed to know how to pray. And even if we don't, we'll act like we do. And maybe we listen to somebody praying and we pick up their phrases. And it's very typical in churches to use the same phrases that people use over and over. Back in the Church of Christ, I remember that there was this phrase, Lord, guide, guard, and direct us. I mean, you heard that in almost every prayer that was prayed. It was just like, you know what's coming. Very few people actually talk like they actually knew they were talking to God. If I was God, I'd be ticked off because it's like, you don't even know me. And I've heard in marriages sometimes when somebody gives you a gift and you hadn't even thought about who they are. Right. You haven't taken time to get to know them with your husband or wife. That's just insulting. You didn't take enough time. And when you are interested in somebody, you try to find out what kind of food that they like, what kind of clothes they like. I want to wear the stuff they like me to look nice in and stuff like that. And God's thinking, guys, did you not even think about talking to me like you knew me? Did you not even consider the things you see me doing? So I appreciate these guys came to Jesus, said, would you teach us how to pray? Chapter 11, verse 1, Luke, he says, one day Jesus was praying in a certain place. When he finished, one of his disciples said to him, Lord, teach us to pray, just as John taught his disciples. He said to them, when you pray, say, and let's do this in King James. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread and forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us or trespasses. For thine is the kingdom and power and glory forever and ever. You go to Catholic churches. I went with my brother. He was the leader in the Catholic Church way before I even had any interest in church. And sometimes they jump down on this little knee thing to kneel down and pray. Then I don't know what to do about that. I'm just standing there looking like, what in the world's going on? And then they say these prayers and they start praying. They just all in unison. They're saying the same thing. Well, it looks so shallow to me that for a long time after I became a Christian, I avoided ever saying these words Jesus taught because I'd heard it in such a meaningless sort of rhetoric where he's just repeating words and they don't seem to have much meaning to them. But I learned over the years, man, this is good. Jesus actually taught us how to pray. And in there, one of the key things he said was, forgive us our sins or our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And we just read back there in Matthew 6, he said, hey, if you don't forgive others, God's not going to forgive you. Now, that's a really good reason to do that. But there are other reasons too. If you think about yourself, how many of you have somebody you just don't get along with too well? Hopefully it's not your wife or husband, but it might be. It can be somebody in your family. I unfortunately tell the story a few months before I became Christian. I went to stay with my dad. He left when I was a toddler, maybe. I never remember him living at home. He's having a really tough time. My brothers wanted me to go spend the summer with him because I was the only one of the 6 brothers that wasn't married at that time. So I went and stayed with him. He lived in Tennessee, and he started carrying a gun because his wife had been murdered earlier that year, and that was really scary to him. One day he got mad at me about something. He pulled that 38 on me. And he offered to pay my way to school if I'd go to UT up there close to him. I said, I might not better do that. It took me a long time to figure out how to deal with, I mean, that wasn't even, Dad was in a rough place then. A few months later, he took his own life. He was just despondent. But it's those years of me growing up without a father, and the years whenever I saw him, all it was is him cussing me out and running me down and stuff like that. And most of all, the way he treated my mom, to be unfaithful to her and leave her with 6 boys to raise. And I was the only nice one out of all 6 of those boys. Can you believe that? And but it was hard for me. It took me years to figure out, how do I honor my father? How do I treat him with respect? And he's gone. I can't even talk to him about it. But I had to think that through and really work through those things and understand it. There may be people in your life like that. Now, there's the everyday casual thing where somebody does something that irritates you or you don't like or something like that. Or there may be people in our lives that just always seem to say negative things about us, or they're critical of us. And so we have to stop and think, well, how would Jesus handle those things? Paul says in Philippians, he says, I want you to imitate me as I imitate Christ. So you can learn from each other. You may find somebody who's really figured this out much better than you have, and you can ask them. But the key thing is to start by just being honest about, yeah, I have some people in my life that I haven't forgiven very well. There's a lot of things that are just really damaging for life. My relationship with my dad was just really bad. He'd said such terrible things to me when I was young. I mean, just really ugly things, because he didn't know. I've noticed this about especially men as we get older. We have a really hard time telling somebody when they feel hurt. If you hurt my feelings, I'm probably going to get mad at you, especially if I'm an older man who hasn't really learned to follow the Bible, and an older woman. Any women could be that way. Our initial response when we get hurt is to hurt somebody in return, or to say something rude to them, and go back and forth. And we don't stop, think, wait a minute, I got to stop the foolishness here. And so we need to really learn. We need to imitate each other, find somebody who's good at that. And the first thing is just be open and honest about, hey, I'm not real good at this thing. I need some help. When we become Christians, we learn to confess our sins to each other and really be honest about things. You guys have been exemplary in that. Now, one thing about forgiveness I see in public situations, sometimes people want to be quick to forgive because they know they're supposed to. They've read that Bible verse. I remember a few years ago, there was this horrible shooting in a black church in Charleston, killed 10 or 11 people. And those people that were part of that church were quick to say, we forgive you. That's not the best thing to do. When somebody sins against you, you don't need to just jump. You need to have a forgiving spirit, but you need to care enough about them to help them say, hey, I want to help you. And what you said really hurt me, but I'd like to work through that with you and figure out, did I do something that caused you to be mad at me or whatever? And that's probably going to catch them really off guard. They might not be prepared to, and they may not want to do that. That's okay. You don't have to force them to do that, but don't just say, I forgive you without following through. Because remember in Matthew 5, Jesus says, Matthew 5:23 says, if you are at the altar giving a gift to God and you remember your brother has something against you, what are you supposed to do? You don't say, I forgive you, or, I'll pray about it and everything will be okay, and I'll go ahead and give. God says, I don't want your gift. That's much less important than you doing the right thing. So he said, go to your brother and reconcile that with him. And in Matthew 18, he reverses the processes. If you're the one that's been hurt, you go to your brother. Now, it's important for you to resolve those things so that you feel good about it. But it's even more important because you're building your character based on the way you act about things. You build your character every day. If you're honest in what you're doing, you're building little pieces of your character. If you cheat on things, if you steal, if you lie, you're building your character in the wrong way. So remember, in everything you do, the important part is not even the most important, is not, oh yeah, we worked it out. We got forgiveness. No, the biggest part is I'm building my character. So I'm going to do what Jesus taught me to do in everything. And to do that, it's important to go back to the scriptures and look at those and be sure you're doing what God says to do. I was listening to an old friend of mine, Gordon Ferguson, preaching. He's doing a Bible lesson that he recorded some weeks ago for this international Bible school. And it was done on Zoom, I think. But it's about discipling. But he mentioned that weekend, he's in Dallas, Texas, said, this weekend we have these two psychologists doing a marriage weekend for us. And Mike and Mary Shapiro, I know them. They used to live in Athens, Georgia. They're both professors at Duke University now. They're department chairs at Duke University in psychology. Mike grew up Jewish in New York City. His wife grew up Catholic. Somehow they found a Catholic priest and a rabbi that would cooperate to do their wedding ceremony. They weren't followers of Jesus or nothing, but they got it worked out. 5 years into their marriage, they met some disciples who baptized them into Christ. And they're both PhD psychologists. Now they're department chairs at Duke University. But he said, we didn't know anything about how to have a marriage the way the Bible taught us to. So we put on speed dial this couple that baptized us. We'd call them up and say, what do you do with this situation? We got a PhD in psychology, but that doesn't teach us how to do what God taught us to do. So that's how important these relationships that you have with one another is. Number one, just be open and honest enough to say, man, I need help. I don't know how to do this stuff. Even if you've been married as long as Ken can't have, you still don't know how to do it. And besides that, you're never objective in those very subjective relationships. So it helps so much. And, Kat will listen to me about something she might not listen to Ken about, but they've been arguing about it. And I'm standing over here on the side. It's so clear to me, but I can call them out and they'll, oh yeah, you're right, But without that, and I guarantee you, I'm the same way. One of the most disarming things I ever learned, and my wife has the gift of a pure heart. She didn't do anything to earn that. Remember, Jesus said, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. He gave that to Gail, just like he gave y'all some different stuff. He gave Amaya all that hair, and he didn't give me much. She didn't do nothing to deserve that. But anyway, Gail has a very pure heart, and I've always learned so much. She thinks she's not as smart as I am, and all these technical people that I hang out with, she thinks she's not as smart as we are because she studied education, elementary education. I just studied elementary education. I don't know nothing, All you people are smart. You talk about all these other things. That is such a bunch of baloney. All those smart people come to Gail. Had a guy in Boston. He studied at Furman University, did his undergrad master's at Brown University, PhD at Brown University. Brown is Ivy League school. He studied chemistry, did postdoc work at Harvard under a Nobel laureate, a guy that won a Nobel Prize before he became a Christian. And he's leading the ministry. He used to ask Gail to come to his staff meetings with him leading a bunch of church staff people to give input to him. He never once asked me to come to that meeting and tell him how to do things better. And Gail's thinking, what do they want me for? I don't know nothing. But it's just that pure heart. She just sees things that other people don't see. That's why even the campus students line up wanting to talk to her. And of course, she's overwhelmed with that, but she likes talking to them. She has to take a little bit of time. But we were having a little row one time. I got mad at her about something. And she says for the first 5 years we're married, I never said anything negative at all. I never got mad about nothing. It was just so fun, easy. But as time goes along, life gets complicated. You got kids, they don't do the right stuff, all this stuff. Then you get grouchy, Trey's getting that way already, I can tell. But anyway, I was angry. I don't know what it was about, but I was mad about something. And Gail, with that pure heart, looked at me and said, did I say something that hurt you? And I just melted, it's like one of these things you bounce in the bouncy house. When you pull the plug, it just goes flat. I had nothing to stand on, so I knew she knew exactly what was going on with me. And all of a sudden I just had to be honest. Yeah. And it could be something so simple. Gordon Ferguson told us one time in Boston, this would have been probably the 1980s. Y'all probably seen the movie E.T., old movie, but it was popular. Back then, we didn't have DVDs, we had video cassettes.
I remember that.
So on the way home from church staff meeting with a couple hundred people, they stopped at the video store. Teresa said, "You want me to get anything?" I said, "Yeah, why don't you get that movie E.T.? We hadn't seen it." She went in, she came back out, and she didn't get that movie. And he said, "I just got so mad, I just pitched a little fit." Gordon is just embarrassingly honest about his sin. I mean, he's just, oh man, he just shames all of us because he's so honest about that. Can you imagine having a fit because your wife didn't get the ET movie? I'd be embarrassed to tell you guys if I did that. I'd probably done a lot worse. But he was really honest. We need to learn to be that gut level honest with one another. And we need to learn when we got our dander all up with somebody that we're mad at them, that we stop and think, why am I acting this way? It's probably because something small that happened. It's rarely because of a real big thing. Now, there's some things that are very traumatic. A lot of people are sexually abused when they're young. They're physically abused, sometimes by their parents or siblings and things like that. That causes trauma. Many of you know my daughter, Tia, lived out here for a while. Tia was a young African-American woman. She grew up around Charlotte. She said she became a Christian her first year in college, and she came to live with us that summer. And she had grown up there. She said, my mom lived with a drug dealer. And she said, mom had 5 kids, no husband. But the drug dealer and mom used to beat her and lock her in the basement at night and then let her go to school. So I came home from school one day in the 9th grade, and they had moved, and they threw my stuff out in the street, and they didn't even tell me where they're going. So for 4 years, she lived on the street and took herself to high school. She had a lot of PTSD, came to live with us. She'd become a Christian, but she couldn't sleep at night without a light on, the overhead light. That's hard to sleep in a place like that. By my age, you can do that, but not many people can. But my wife took her to a counselor all summer, got a lot of help. She's married, got kids now. She's actually a professor at Georgia Tech now. She came down here after her first degree and worked over in Montgomery because she wanted to be a part of this church. She'd heard about you guys, and she just loved being down here. That got a couple degrees, and she's living in, I think she's getting a PhD right now. But anyway, some of you may have been through things like that. It's going to take more than just saying, well, I'm going to forgive that person, or you talking to Jack or Kat about it and get over it. That's helpful to be honest when you've been through something like that. And some of us, old men or women, have never been honest about some of the stuff that went on that really hurt us when we were young. It's good to do that. And sometimes just talking it through with a brother or sister can help you through that. But you may need to get professional help. Absolutely. Don't ever hesitate when you do need to do that. But learn how to be forgiving the way Jesus was and clear things up so that there's no question about that. Because if you don't, you're building that character with a lot of flaws in it, and eventually it's going to fail. My old professor at Auburn had taught heat transfer. His name was Wingard. He had smoked, and I got a pen. He had that cigarette hanging out like it's going to fall out in a minute. We used to take bets on how long the ashes were going to get on the end of that cigarette during class. He could still smoke before it fell off. But anyway, Wingard, I remember one of the things he told us one day in class. This is back during the space program, 73 or 4. So the space shuttle hadn't been invented yet. But he's using the example. He said, we send people in space and their lives are depending on a transistor that probably costs 10 cents. He said, what they do to make those things better, a transistor is made out of silicon, and silicon's a crystalline structure, but it has holes in it. He said to make those things better, you hit it with a big shock of electric current, and it knocks all those little crystal balls, and they fall back into place and the hole goes away. If you don't do that, you get out in space somewhere and it gets a shock. The hole's going to happen then. It's going to fail. And your life depends on that. Our lives have some holes in it. We need to shock it and get those things lined up so we can be solid. And going forward, we don't let those things control the way we're thinking.
Yeah.
Anyway, back in Matthew chapter 7, somebody read verse 7 and 8 for us. You got that, Devontae? Verse 7 and 8. Matthew 7, 7 and 8.
Ask and it shall be given. Seeking you find, knocking it shall be opened unto you. For everyone that asks receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth. And to him that knocketh it shall be opened.
Okay. So even in that, it kind of makes a mnemonic: ask, A-S-K, ask, seek, and knock. First letters of the word ask. Spell that out for us. He says, if you ask and seek and knock, you're going to find answers. You need to always be in the mode of asking things, asking advice, asking questions. I don't care how old you get. Don't forget to do that, because some of you still need to learn how to apply the stuff about forgiveness better than you have already learned. And one of the things you could do is ask other people, do you feel like I'm pretty good at being forgiving, or maybe not? And especially if you're married, you ask your wife or your husband, and hopefully they'll be honest with you, and hopefully you'll be smart enough to not get mad at them if they are honest. If you have a friend who'll be honest with you to help you, that is just like a gold mine for you. And same thing when you get into your career, you can do that too. Don't worry about coming in here late, brother. Good to see you, man. But learn to ask things, and it's always good to learn to ask, hey, did I do something that hurt you if somebody's mad at you? And you can do that with people that are not necessarily Christians or part of our fellowship or something. I met a guy a couple of months ago, came to church, and he's a black man, probably 50 years old or something. And met him with this young lady that I knew, and she introduced him as her boyfriend. And that kind of sets off alarm bells to me, because I want a FBI resume on you if you're going to be dating my daughter. And guys, all you brothers know that. Well, I kind of jokingly said something about that, and he didn't look like he took that too well. And I didn't know. I thought maybe it's from church somewhere, but he wasn't. But she's dating him, and I've known her a while. So the next time we met, I said, hey, I've forgotten your name. Can you tell me again? He said, no, we're not friends on that basis yet. You can call me Dr. So-and-so. And it was obvious, it came across like he had a chip on his shoulder, but I listened to it. His girlfriend's standing there, and she didn't say nothing. So we talked about it a minute. The next time we met, I said, hey, could we have lunch? And he said, why do you want to do that? I said, well, you told me we're not friends yet. I thought maybe we have lunch. We could become friends. And he's kind of pushing back a little bit. He had a few other things to say about church. And, but he agreed. We had lunch together, and we actually really hit it off, So don't let people push you back, and don't you get mad at them because they didn't act like they're just supposed to act and everything. And if you make mistakes, apologize, move forward, and make the time. I tell this to high school kids when I'm teaching high school STEM classes. If you have somebody you don't get along with very well, ask them to have lunch with you. The main reason we usually don't like people is because we don't know them. We've never taken time. The reason we usually stay away from somebody is they're very different from me. Maybe your skin color is different from my skin color. Maybe you're an athlete and I'm a nerd, things like that. So just if you got somebody you don't get along with, talk to them about, hey, can we get together and do something? Because I want to get to know you better. And you may not hit it off right away, but honestly, this fella has started 2 companies. He's been very successful. And by the time we're through getting together for an hour, he's invited me to several events he's doing. In fact, he was doing some kind of big presentation at the New York Fashion Show. That ain't a little thing. That's a big deal. And so I'm getting in his office on this like 22nd floor downtown Atlanta. Man, I ain't got no office like that. So I'm very impressed with what he's done, but I also realize that he needs to learn from me, and we'll benefit each other. But we got to get past that bristly phase of where we don't like how each other looks or something like that.
Right.
And I appreciate him opening up. And he didn't necessarily know the Bible and all that, but he opened up to our friendship, and we built something on that. So when you meet people like that, turn to Ephesians 4, verse 32. And somebody read 4:32 for me. All right. And brothers over there's got it. They already talking about it. Well, the pretty girl raised her hand. Let her read it. So she'll probably do a better job than Terry.
Instead, be kind to each other, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, just as God through Christ is forgiven.
Ephesians 4 is just, man, that's like nuclear fuel. It's got so much stuff in it. Ephesians 4:29. How many of you know what Ephesians 4:29 says? Don't let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what's helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. Man, that is like so concentrated. If you apply that one verse, you could spend a long time just learning how to build your life with that. So you don't say things about people or to people that you shouldn't be saying. And we ought to really be careful about that. Down to Ephesians 4:32. I love this in the King James because when my daughter was 3 years old, she's going to this little daycare school or something like that. It was a church. Or maybe I think it was that. It could have been Bible class, but she had this young friend there, Scott. And his mom asked him on the way home, what did he learn in Bible class or in class? And he said, well, I learned this verse. He quoted it to her. And it says, and be ye kind one to another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another. And I think she asked him, well, what are you going to do about that? And he mentioned Sarah, and he said, I'm going to be ye kind to Sarah. He's quoting it out of the King James there. But it's always stuck with me. Such a wonderful concept. And a 3-year-old, no wonder Jesus said, you guys need to listen to the children and learn from them. He said, you don't become like them, you're never going to get into heaven. That's just an amazing thing. When I was in Boston, I was overseeing the children's ministry at church. We had about 500 people in our region, so a lot of kids. And then when the whole church got together, we had several thousand people and lots of kids. So every Sunday, I tend to be ADD, so I like getting out of church and not sitting there listening to the sermon. So during the sermon, I go back and visit the classrooms, make sure everything's going good, and it gives me a break. But I had this young man named Joel Blau. Joel was born, his parents started a church in Bombay, India. They did what we call at that time the one suitcase challenge, they said. And his dad was an engineer, worked at Bell Labs, really smart guy. But they said, if you're going to go with us to Bombay, that place has got poor people everywhere. You can only take one suitcase. You can't take anything more than that. Because those poor people over there are not going to relate to you if you come in with all your fancy stuff. So one suitcase. His mother stopped teaching school, the grandmother, and moved over there with him. She had to take one suitcase. But Joel's very young, and they soon realized he had some mental problems. I would call it autistic because I don't know anything better. But after some years, they moved back to Boston, and Joel had to be living in a dormitory because he could get violent as a young man. And now he's probably in his 20s somewhere. And he lived in a dormitory where he could get the care he needed, but he'd come home on the weekends and go to church with him. And he would go with me every Sunday to go back to the children's ministry. And we'd walk back there, and all the teachers knew Joel, and they liked him, and all the kids knew me. And so one of the final times I'm in Boston, just before we moved here to Atlanta, Joel and I are going out, and he looked forward to that time. Every time we got back, when we finished, I'd give him a bottle of Mountain Dew. I'd get it out of my cooler, and he would walk into the auditorium, preacher's preaching, he'd hold it up like he's carrying an Oscar. And I told him, Joel, put it in your pockets. You're going to distract people. He wouldn't do it, man. He walked in with that Oscar in his hand, got back in with his mom and dad. But that last Sunday, we're heading out to walk back to the children's ministry. We're in the school building. And this young lady came over and asked me if I would hold her baby, because I loved holding babies. And she saw it as kind of a rite of passage. I didn't know her. She didn't even speak English. She's Hispanic, but her friend's with her, and the baby's like 3 weeks old. And I said, well, I got to go back to the class. Yeah, that's okay. And her friend's with her. So I said, okay, I'll take the baby. I like him. So we're walking back there, and we walked a little ways, and Joel stopped, and he always called me by my full name, Jack Frederick. He turned to me and said, Jack Frederick, does that baby know Alan Roscoe? And I said, no, Joel, she's only 3 weeks old. She doesn't know anybody yet. Walked on a few steps, and Joel turned to me and said, Jack Frederick, you're my best friend. I pray for you every day. I mean, that he's the epitome of a child. He has a childlike heart. So I moved down here a month later, and I'm in charge of redeveloping the Patriot missile. Got that going on. We can build 18 rockets, and none of them can blow up as part of the certification of that thing. One of the things the United Nations requires qualifying a rocket for a missile is you have to hoist it 40 feet in the air and drop it on a concrete slab, and it can't blow up, can't get on fire and stuff like that. It's part of the because you're loading it on a ship. You don't want to drop it and the thing blows up like a bomb. So it's got to work that well. Did all that, never had a problem. And one Friday afternoon, my boss was in Huntsville, and I barely knew him because he kind of managed me, but I never lived over there. And he didn't like the fact that I didn't live there and was like everybody else. You know, Trey's worked remotely some too. I know how that goes, but he didn't like me. He was an old Army guy. And after a couple of years, one Friday afternoon, his boss called me and left a message. And I told my wife, because I stayed home that week because she had some surgery. And I said, you know, I may get fired because they don't like me being not like everybody else. They want you to fit into the mold. But I'm going to call him back. And I said, I may be in trouble. I don't know what I did. So I called my boss's boss back, and he said, are you going to be in Huntsville Monday? No, I'm with my wife. I go look after her. I only come over there maybe once a month, and I brief you guys on how we're doing on the missile, and I brief the Army Missile Command. I'm the liaison with them. And my boss's boss said, well, that's okay. You've been chosen as Employee of the Year for the company, and the vice president's going to give you an award Monday. I'll just get it, and you can pick it up when you're over here. You get a promotion out of this and all this stuff. I went from thinking I'm going to get fired to where I'm getting an award. But when I reviewed my career that year with my boss, I told him, you know, he's telling me I did a good job and all this. I said, well, I worked hard at that. But I got this young guy in Boston. He prays for me every day, and he has this childlike heart. I said, I got to say, I think God's blessed what we did because of what Joel prays. I don't know if that guy's a believer, nothing like that. But I felt like, man, if I'm not honest about this, God may not bless me. So I was just honest about it. So if you can get people to pray for you like that, if they understand you and care about you in that way, it's a great benefit. But remember what I said too about forgiveness is also about helping the other person. It's not just saying, I'll overlook what you did. Rather, you want to do what's best for them. You do need to have that forgiving spirit and be willing to forgive. You notice when you pray to God and you talk about your sins, what do you ask God?
Forgive your own. Honestly.
God, will you forgive me for this, and this? You always ask. But God made it clear in that verse we read to start with. He said, if you don't forgive others, I won't forgive you. You can ask all day, but if you're not forgiving, he's not going to be forgiving to you. But we need to do the same thing with each other about forgiveness. Don't just assume they're going to forgive you, whatever. You need to ask. And you need to teach other people how important it is to ask, because it makes you very humble when you ask things. And don't just blow it off like, well, yeah, I know they're forgiving, or hey, I'm sorry I messed up. And don't just excuse yourself by saying I'm sorry and then move on. Rather, take the time to say, would you forgive me for what I did? And I teach that when I'm counseling married couples, if they hurt each other. I always ask them to go through those specific things. Say, I want you to ask her to forgive you for what you did. And I want her to do the same thing. And sometimes they feel a little hokey about it because I'm telling them what to do. But I said, you need to learn how to do this. This ought to be your regular procedure, even in your home. It doesn't mean everything you do, you got to stop and have a conversation about it. But you ought to be humble enough to where you realize, if I really hurt my wife, I need to ask her, will you forgive me? And there are times when, maybe she's so mad or I'm so mad, they don't want to forgive you. They don't want to just say that. I got to have time to process that. That's okay, because you need to give them time to process it. And that goes for anybody you talk to. But you ought to start the whole process by being humble enough to say, would you forgive me for that, and acknowledge what you did wrong, and that you need to ask them forgiveness. And some people may not forgive you, if they're not Christians. They may not be willing to, but at least you did what you're supposed to by asking them, and they saw your humility in it. And they're going to remember that, because that ought to be your trademark. They ought to see that in everything you do, that you're applying the scriptures and you're trying to live them out. You ain't trying to be goody two shoes. You're just trying to do what's right, because if you don't do this, God's not going to forgive you either. He's holding you accountable for those things as well. So it's going to take some practice. You need to really work at practicing this, learning how to do it, and be forgiving yourself, but also learn how to ask stuff. Asking always requires more humility than just saying, I'm sorry. I have an old friend that for years I've made a point that she would say, I'm sorry, but it makes you feel like, I'm sorry you're so stupid that you didn't understand, And so when she says, I'm sorry, man, and she's gotten better about that with age, but I've seen that with other people. It's easy for us to say, I'm sorry, with a disdainful attitude without really being sorry. Man, I'm really sorry that I hurt you. Would you forgive me? Be sure and go that extra mile to ask things. Don't just assume that because I said the right words, everything's okay. Make sure they're good with it. And if you need somebody, just like Jesus said in Matthew 5 and Matthew 18, you may need to get somebody in there with you too. That's okay. That's a good biblical thing to do, to get others to help you out with it. It pulls in other people. It helps you. You learn stuff, and they may learn the process too. So, all right, I'm done with that. So I'll let y'all do whatever you do from this point on.